Well, hi friends, I'm Brian Cosby. This is Theology Q&A, where we answer your questions on the Bible, Christianity, theology, and ministry in under 5 minutes. So let's get into it. So the question today is, what is predestination? Of all the topics in Christian theology, predestination probably is one of the most controversial and confusing to a lot of people. And a lot of people categorize predestination under the heading of Reformed theology, stemming from the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s. But it would be a mistake to think that predestination originated with the Reformers like Luther or Calvin or Zwingli or Knox or someone like that. Rather, the Reformers were simply just reading the Scriptures. They were going back to the sources, ad fontes, back to the fount. And when they did, they were reading through the various documents, not only in the Old Testament, but the New Testament, the original Hebrew and Greek. And they were seeing in the Scriptures themselves this wonderful, beautiful doctrine called predestination. But the basic idea of predestination means, proorizo in the original Greek, would mean that God would determine beforehand those whom he would save. Whether you're in the Old Testament and God choosing Israel, for example, in Deuteronomy chapter 7, and the reason that God chose Israel as a nation was not because of anything in them. It was unconditional, therefore, election. And this is the U in the TULIP acronym, maybe you've heard of. But it says in John chapter 10, they're asking him, "What do you tell us if you're the Christ?" Plainly. And he says in John 10, verse 25, "I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name bear witness about me." Listen, "but you do not believe because you are not part of my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life. They will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand." Okay. So he's saying the reason that you don't believe, to those that were around him, well, they're not part of the sheep. You don't become a sheep through faith. You have faith because you were already part of the flock. In other words, your name was already written in the Lamb's book of life from before the foundation of the world. That's Revelation chapter 13, verse 8. So your name is already written as part of his sheep. Christ comes and you hear his voice through his word, and God gives you by his sovereign grace and nothing in you, he gives you eternal life. Paul and Barnabas in Acts 13, they're preaching the gospel, and it says in Acts 13, verse 48, "And when the Gentiles heard this," that's the gospel, the good news, "they began rejoicing and glorifying the word of the Lord, and as many as were appointed to eternal life believed." Some people, raise the objection, well, if God has predestined the people, then why do we evangelize? Well, God saves through the proclamation of the word. He brings in his people through the proclamation of the word. So we turn over to the book of Romans, and it says in Romans chapter 8, verse 29, "For those whom he foreknew," this is important actually, "for those whom God foreknew, he also predestined." Some people say, well, God just looks down the quarter of time and he sees, Johnny, and Johnny in his own goodness and righteousness and wisdom and all of that that's inherent within himself. I'm kidding right now because there is no one who is righteous. Romans 9 really highlights the sovereign grace of God in salvation. And Paul is expecting pushback because you have these twins that are born, Jacob and Esau, and before they're born, God says, "Jacob I loved, Esau I've hated." That's Romans 9, verse 13. They're just quoting the Old Testament there too. And then he goes through several examples with Moses, with Pharaoh, to show, as it says in Romans 9, verse 18, "So then he," that's God, "has mercy on whomever he wills, and he hardens whomever he wills." Verse 19, "You will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who can resist his will? But who are you, O man, to answer back to God? What is molded, say to its molder, why have you made me like this? Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for dishonorable use? What if God, desiring to show his wrath and to make known his power, has endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction? Listen, in order to make known the riches of his glory for vessels of mercy which he has prepared beforehand for glory." Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4, "Even as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him. And in love, he predestined us for adoption to himself as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of his will." Verse 11 of Ephesians chapter 1. In him we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his will. All the way through the scriptures, it speaks of God's sovereign grace in electing, predestining a people for himself that he has saved. We don't deserve it. People say, well, that's not fair, that God would save some and not save others. Well, what would be fair? What would be just? Well, the fair or just thing is that we would all go to hell. We don't deserve salvation, that we deserve hell. We deserve death forever, the wages of our sin. But God, in his sovereign mercy, has saved us. He has sent his Son into the world to save his people, his sheep, John 10, his bride, Ephesians 5. And there's nothing in us that provoked him or moved him or was the condition upon which God saved us. So that is predestination. Well, I hope this has been helpful for you today. If you have questions that you would like answered, please drop those down below. And if you've not already done so, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. I really appreciate you and your support, and we'll see you on the next video.